couldn't help but dance when they cha-lang-a-lang spread the message of aloha, of truth, of unity from Waikiki shell down to Miloli'i. You say it's ma'akiki, I say it's ma'alahi. To rap a little Hawaii with the manako that is in me. To our musicians that came before, until we meet again, mahalo. Until we go.
You see me now, Hawaiian eyes, and you see me lost in paradise. So sad you had to go, and we just want you to know that we miss you inside. Hawaiian
Connect live with entrepreneurs who are bringing Hawaii to the world. Join us at the Mana Up Showcase, presented live from the Hawaii Theater. Hawaii's rising entrepreneurs present their passion.
I saw it as an opportunity, and I took it.
Don't miss the Mana Up Showcase, Friday, November 20th.
Aloha kako. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this lovely presentation of the future economics of Hawaii. I'd like to pass this up to our esteemed, also member of our group, Chris Gatto. Kavanai, I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulties.
Oh, my camera won't turn on. Should I leave and come back?
Okay, there we go.
Okay. Is it working? All right. Hey, he kumu, hey, he lundo, hey, he pu, abahiva, kai, he awe, he pu. Aloha no. Welcome to our first virtual La'Ku'oko'a Hawaii Independence Day. So I'm joined here by my our colleague. We have a wonderful panel, and I'm just going to set it up for us a bit. So give me 1 second while I navigate these windows. Feel free to leave comments in the chat as we go along, and we should be able to circle back towards the end for any questions that you might have. 6 o'clock here in New York, 1 o'clock Hawaii, almost 3 o'clock in the morning in the country of Georgia. So here we go. I wanted just to share a couple of slides and 2 or 3 short video clips, and then we'll get to our wonderful roundtable. So let me just share my screen. So we're here in La'Ku'oko'a 2020. This is from May 12th, 2020. Americans giving up citizenship faster than ever before, reports Banbridge Accountants, New York. Americans are renouncing their citizenship at the highest levels on record, according to research by the enrolled agents and accountants, Banbridge Accountants in New York. U.S. image plummets internationally as most say country has handled coronavirus badly. Ratings for Trump remain poor. You have a graph here. In some countries, ratings for U.S. are at a record low. American exceptionalism in a pandemic. We have below here 3 takeaways from the author Fareed Zakaria. American exceptionalism has made us, quote unquote, smug and lazy and hindered our ability to learn lessons from other countries that have responded much better to the crisis. There needs to be greater sharing of information between nations, particularly when it comes to the best medical and scientific approaches. We do need to change our ways when it comes to risky behaviors that have led to the destruction of natural habitats of wild animals, along with factory farming practices that create petri dishes for powerful viruses. You have this article from InPress, how Cuba is leading the world in the fight against coronavirus. As Cuba sends doctors around the world to fight coronavirus, a Cuban antiviral drug, interferon alpha 2B, is helping countries like China stem the tide of the outbreak. That was in March of this year. Back to Fareed Zakaria, you have this interesting quote from his book, The Post-American World. The tallest building in the world is now in Dubai. The biggest factory in the world is in China. The largest oil refinery is in India. The largest investment fund in the world is in Abu Dhabi. The largest Ferris wheel in the world is in Singapore, Fareed Zakaria. So we're moving away from this idea of American exceptionalism. And you have here an interesting graph, the world's youngest countries, sovereign countries by date established and years of independence. So the youngest seems to be South Sudan as of this, this graph in 2011. And you have this other country, Slovakia, in 1993 was formed. But the important thing we'll get to during this webinar is that the Hawaiian nation, the sovereignty has existed in continuity, and we'll get to that a little later. But it comes back to this idea of managing a nation's brand. So when billions in the balance, why managing a nation's brand matters. Companies carefully nurture their brand names because they know it affects business. a good name can bring in higher returns. Is it time for countries to cultivate their own brands? So we come to this graph, which will kind of help us navigate all the topics that we're going to be sharing on this webinar. And on the left, top left, you have foreign direct investment. On the right, you have kind of brand identity. At the bottom to the left, tourism, and on the right, public diplomacy. The mistake that nations make sometimes is thinking that these things are separate things, when sometimes they can overlap and influence each other. So these are some of the things that to keep in mind as we move along. So we have this, for those who don't know, this is the seal, the so-called state of Hawaii, and the state's motto at the bottom, Ua mau ke'ea o ka aina I ka pono. And so, you know, this is an example of branding, but it's also kind of plagiarism, isn't it? Because this is the motto that comes from our holiday, La Hoi Hoi Ea, which is it's a holiday when the British restored Hawaiian sovereignty in July. So it's just a little bit of setup for us. I'll just play a few short clips and then we'll introduce our panel. So if you can give me 1 second.
Oop, lost your volume.
Okay, so just a short example of how the world kind of views tourism in this time. It's an old clip.
I'm just a pretty Maui girl. I'll wear a grass skirt too. I'm just a pretty Maui girl. I'll wear a grass skirt too.
Madam.
La da da dee da.
Madam.
Da 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 dee da. You called?
I thought I'd lost you.
Oh, you have. Oh, Oahu, Kauai, Maui, ports of paradise.
Madam, come back to me just for a minute. Come back.
I don't think there's anything more to talk about.
Now, just a minute. You have not seen Hawaii until you see Hawaii.
You have not seen Hawaii until you see Hawaii?
That's right.
What are you, some kind of a nut or something?
So we went from that era to today.
Hawaiian Day of Recognition replace Good Friday as an official state holiday. That's one of the possibilities being discussed by lawmakers. Jen Boniza has more on the proposal. Jen?
Joe, there are currently 13 state holidays recognized here in Hawaii. 3 of them are specific to the islands: Prince Kuhio Day, Kamehameha Day, and Statehood Day. The new holiday being discussed is La Ku'uko'o Day, and it is a historically significant one. I met with Senator Kalani English, who drafted the bill to recognize La Ku'uko'o Day.
This is a very old Hawaiian holiday, and it was recognized by the Kingdom of Hawaii, by the provisional government, by the Republic of Hawaii, by the Territory of Hawaii. The British and the French issued a joint declaration in the 1840s recognizing Hawaii as a sovereign power.
This is Hawaii's copy of the Anglo-French Declaration signed in 1843. It became La Ku'uko'o in 1847, and it was recognized as a holiday here in Hawaii from 1847 to 1903. English tells me the time is right to reinstate the holiday.
We have this one last clip from Kanaio Kana. after the overthrow, the Republic of Hawaii tried to erase the memory of Lakuokoa by replacing it with Thanksgiving. So mahalo, we'll take a moment now to introduce our panel. We can go around and with some brief introductions. We have
Chris, just so you know that I think our videos are turned off.
Oh, Stacy, is that something we can fix?
Yeah, you are the host.
I'm not sure how to turn the cameras on. Can I make you the host again?
Let's
see.
Okay, everybody should be able to start.
Okay, mahalo. Sorry about that. So we'll have Kaina, you like a brief introduction?
Aloha kako. My name is Kaina Kinga. I'm here on Moku'okea'a, Ma'o'okala. I am part of Mauli NYC, helping bringing the celebrations of Laku'oko'a to New York in the past years. Mahalo for having me. Aloha.
Over a decade. Ron Williams.
Aloha mai kako. Ovao Ron Williams Jr. Ko'ino piha. Kua mo'o o lelo vau I ke ka'ahuhui Hawaii aloha aina. Akavika mavau a me he mea kakao vau. So my name is Ron Williams Jr. I'm a historian, I'm a writer, I'm an archivist at the State Archives, and I appreciate the invite today to talk about Hawaiian history.
With Keone. Keone's the one joining us from the country of Georgia. I don't know if he's frozen.
Currently in Tbilisi, Georgia. Oh, sorry. Are you able to hear me? Okay. My name is Keone DeFranco. Aloha. Currently based in Tbilisi, Georgia, where my wife is from. Have been the founder and CEO of a startup in the New York City area for the past 9 years, where we've hosted a wide variety of different Hawaiian community events. I'm also a delegate for a UN NGO called IAAI, and I am a senior executive advisor to the nation of Hawaii.
Mahalo. And last but not least, Mr. Kaika.
Hey everybody, aloha. Thanks for joining us on Laku'oko'a, or almost Laku'oko'a. And I'm from Kalihi, on the island of Oahu, and my work is primarily in political and community organizing, and also in social enterprise, working a lot on climate issues.
Okay, mahalo. So the last clip we played kind of alluded to Thanksgiving overtaking the memory of Laku'oko'a, and wanted to pass it to Dr. Ron Williams Jr. Second, this idea between narrative versus remembrance. And if you could kind of speak to that.
Sure. Well, I think it's important to start out with this idea of I think the majority of the audience, or the general audience, when we talk about Hawaii, is saying, what do you mean nation, right? What do you mean celebrating a nationhood? I moved here in 1986 and didn't know Hawaii was a nation ever, and had a certain narrative about Kanakawi Hawaiians and the Hawaiian nation that was kind of the master narrative, you know, the things that most people know. And what I came to find out through my bachelor's degree, I have a bachelor's in Hawaiian studies, a master's in Pacific Island studies, and a PhD in Hawaiian and world history. And what I came to understand through that work was the idea that the narrative of identity of Kanakawi, of Hawaiians and Hawaiian subjects in a nation, was nearly completely erased. Like you said, that there's the written narrative, but then there's the remembrance. And the small group of men, an oligarchy that overthrew the sovereign Hawaiian nation in 1893, did a great job of removing that history. And hopefully we'll talk about that in just a bit. But so when I arrived here in 1986, I had never heard of a nation. Hawaii was obviously part of the United States. And to be frank and to be honest, what I heard about Hawaiians was that they are, you know, not as accomplished in school, maybe a little bit slower. Those are the kids are going to sit in the back of the class and you know, be quiet. They're good for government jobs, you know, things like that. Those tropes that have been, you know, talked about for almost a century. The truth is quite a bit different. Myself and many others have worked in the Hawaiian Language Archive to start platforming native Hawaiian voice in Hawaiian history. Imagine that. I like to talk about the fact that today, even after this 20 or 30 years of work of all of us, today, if you go into a library and you pull 100 library books about Hawaii, published about Hawaii, 95% of them are going to be completely from English language sources, which means ship captains, you know, whalers, missionaries, missionary wives, and so forth. Well, the people of Hawaii, the nation of Hawaii, spoke and wrote prolifically. We have almost 1 million pages of Hawaiian language newspapers. We have hundreds of thousands of letters, legal documents done, Maka'olelo Hawaii, in the native language of the people. And we're just now starting to access that stuff. And what that stuff tells us is the truth about the past. My very first kumu, when I was in Maui, a man named Akoni Akana, he coined a phrase called Ikava Mamua Kava Mahope, which means the future is in the past. Today,
I just want to mahalo, and maybe I just pass it to Ikaika because this whole idea of Governor Ige kind of convening this economic survival plan without consulting with the Native Hawaiian community. Do you think that maybe is a result of this kind of erasure of consciousness of a previous Hawaii?
Yeah, I mean, I always ask the question every time there's an election, why is it that none of the candidates, like for governor, have, like, not only do they not speak the language where most of the history that Ron's talking about is written, they probably have never thought about learning the language. Like, it's never even occurred to them as something that they might be missing. And part of that too is that no one asks. No one ever asks, by the way, do you understand where most of our history is written down? Do you understand any of that information? So, I mean, I think there's absolutely a systematic erasure. It is also, it's a situation where, like, we have an 800-year-old fish pond, just, you know, on the other side of, in Heia, that is regarded as sort of a cultural artifact. I choose to see it as a symbol of incredible engineering that has lasted for 8 centuries, capable of feeding, you know, hundreds of thousands of people probably. And I'm sorry, that's probably an exaggeration in terms of the quantity of people. But just, you know, you understand the point I'm trying to make. We've done incredible work. We talk about rail, for instance, as like Hawaii's largest engineering project, but we've been doing engineering for a long time.
Yeah, a legacy.
In incredible ways. Yeah, and it's
the exactly those kinds of. Do you have thoughts on Kalani English's bill to have Laku'okoa become a state holiday? So a national holiday becomes a U.S. state holiday. Is that a kind of compromise, or do you have any thoughts that you could share with us?
It's fine. Sure.
Yeah, I think you made comparisons to Texas and some other states that have similar recognitions, but maybe just pass it to Kaina, how we've been celebrating our national holidays over a decade, starting with La Hoi Ho'iea and cool. You want to share for our audience what that kind of looked like for us? Sometimes it was public, sometimes it was just an intimate gathering, for example.
Yeah, we started with just wanting to bring awareness back to ourselves about the holiday, in addition to the communities that we were in. So we started at Union Square, and we gathered and we had our flags. And initially, we
It was
kept getting stuck.
July, it was in the summer.
Yeah, I kept thinking we were petitioning as opposed to celebrating the holiday, because they weren't aware of the holiday in itself. And so we celebrated there for a few years and then moved over to Rockefeller Park, where we continued celebrating, and also had other like states like Boston and Washington join us for the celebration. And we did little side events where we were able to bring more history to the of the holiday to the people, as well as about the flag in itself. And you were there to bring Ava and music as well. So yeah, it was a great way.
Keone had the massive flags, the massive high that he brought down when he was able to join us.
Onomea, which was one of the
Mhm.
few or only like Hawaiian, like local Hawaiian restaurant, a small, like, grandma style. She had like bento or musubis and poke. She always ran out of poke. Oh no, and yeah, we were able to host it at Onomea. We also invited our other family, like our Mauli cousins, where they brought their chants and music as well. Ata Papa celebrated with us. She's actually in the video of La Ku'oko'a. So, yeah, it was a great way to bring everybody together for that at a Hawaiian restaurant in Brooklyn.
I think Ron has a flyer of it in one of his presentations I saw on YouTube. So this says, yeah, I think that was ours. Keone, could you share maybe what it was like for you as Kanaka Mauli to be able to connect with the New York Hawaii community over these holidays? What that was like for you?
Absolutely. So, I was born and raised on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. Both of my mother's parents are Hawaiian. Grandmother's from Molokai. Grandfather is from Ewa Beach, Oahu. But he was in the military, so they ended up moving around pretty frequently. And my parents ended up meeting in Washington, D.C., where I grew up. So I spent a lot of my youth traveling to Hawaii, visiting with ohana, with cousins, with aunties and uncles. But it wasn't until I graduated from college and my grandparents showed me a long genealogy that my great grandma had prepared for the first time, that I actually looked into this and felt an immense amount of kuleana and ownership, and really felt I needed to do something. And so, that was the year I moved to New York. My grandma had a few friends that were actually board members at Hawai, and they really helped open the door and extend a community to me that meant a lot. And so, through that network, I met Kaina, I met Chris. Through our relationship, we ended up learning Oli with Auntie Pulani, Kanaka Ole. and just, you know, really opening my mind to what I could do as a diaspora Hawaiian. And so all the holidays that we shared together, all the mana'o that shared when, you know, uncles and torchbearers come into the UN in New York and share their progress, you know, really inspired me to do as much as I could for our lahui.
And probably mahalo, and probably you work in technology as well, and probably social media and things was able to bring materials like what Ron has been working on at the State Archives to your attention, bring you closer to materials, historical materials?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Kanaka Twitter is actually extremely active and a great way for Hawaiians around the world to continue to share information with each other, discuss what's going on, get petitions signed. And so, you know, as the world gets larger, I think the Hawaiian community grows with it and is able to utilize technology as kind of the building blocks for the foundation of our nation.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in, Chris, and mention that the knowledge that has been, that the Hawaiians outside of Hawaii have been able to garner through all of their life and family experiences is incredibly valuable. And I'm really interested in figuring out how do we bring a lot of that back to the archipelago, where we frankly really need smart Hawaiians and, you know, to augment the work that's happening in Hawaii right now. You know, there's sort of there's a tendency, I guess we could say, that when people look for leadership within, like for the people in Hawaii, when we look for leadership, we tend to look not to our own people. And really there is so much ike and experience and education, you know, that like Keone has had, or Kaina in her life outside of Hawaii, that, you know, let's, you know, lave ia mai ia ne'i ke olu olu, because we really need it.
Mahalo. Yeah, and I want to just maybe frame it back to this idea of nation branding. And, you know, we have such a rich, vast, large story world, which maybe we sell ourselves short sometimes. And so this Pacific, I'll just pass it to Ron, if I may, because King Kalakaua circumnavigated the globe, as we know. And so from that time to what we have here is spreadable media. You know, the technology available to us, hashtag Kanaka Twitter, really kind of opens up the size and scope of our story world. So do we want to be like an independent little film, or are we like a Marvel universe of Kanaka Mauli? You know, it's totally two different paradigms. And I'll just pass it to Ron.
Well, I think that, you know, as far as the future, I'll leave that to the political scientists, but I can tell you that what the kingdom did in the past was reach out effectively. You know, I've never, one of my areas is world history. I don't know of another example where you know, you're talking about a nation of 150,000 people at its height, right? So 150,000 people, while there are nations around the world with 20 million and 40 million and 60 million and so forth, yet the Hawaiian Kingdom was the nation that people were talking about at those world conferences and so forth. You know, one of the kind of neat facts that most folks don't know, when Kauikioli started, when the nation was recognized as a sovereign nation in 1843, they started to create consulates around the world, right? Washington, D.C. and so forth. But Kalakaua was really the one that kind of took that to another level. And recently I published a list of the Hawaiian Kingdom consulates abroad. During the time of Kalakaua, from 1843 actually to 1893, there were 136 Hawaiian Kingdom consulates around the world on 6 continents. 136. How many people know that, right?
Wow.
There was a Hawaiian Kingdom consulate in Pretoria, South Africa, in St. Petersburg, Russia, in Valparaiso, Chile, right? So, and they weren't just for show. You know, some of Kalakaua's critics talk about his work as being ornamental. The Hawaiian Kingdom consulates abroad, their kuleana, their responsibility was to protect Hawaiian Kingdom subjects in those countries. There's a story in the 1890s. There's a 1891. There's a consulate in Port Townsend near Seattle, Washington. And there's some sailors, Kanaka sailors, that are on a ship. They get off at Port Townsend, and the captain refuses to pay them. He just absconds. And so you've got these 4 or 5, brown sailors in the middle of nowhere. What do? They go to the Hawaiian Kingdom consulate in Port Townsend, file a complaint. The consulate takes it up with the Supreme Court of the Territory of Washington, and they get their money, right? So this is Hawaiian Kingdom authority throughout the world on 6 different continents. So those types of things are really important to grab onto to understand the outsized place that Hawaii had in the world.
Right. And so what does that look like in the 21st century? Right. In a world where we're connected through digital 24/7, almost embedded communications, and where sometimes, in many situations, I think nation states are actually secondary to global corporations in terms of their impact on each and every person on the planet. And where so many of our issues are not national issues, they're actually international and global issues like climate change. Or how do we deal with, multi-billionaire elites like Jeff Bezos, who seem really intent on leaving Earth, but going to another planet, not just like dying. They actually want to go to Mars. What is sovereignty and self-determination? These ideas which we've harvested from the Treaty of Westphalia in the 19th century, what do they look like when we project forward for the next 100 years of the Hawaiian Kingdom?
And one example that I can speak to is efforts that the nation of Hawaii is currently doing. So for them, for the first time in 25 years, they're accepting and encouraging digital applications for citizens, both Kanaka residing in Hawaii or abroad, as well as non-Kanaka. And so what they're trying to launch is really a borderless nation utilizing blockchain identity to allow citizens from all over the world to partake in government-related activities. So this is getting verified by city officials, casting votes for open elections that they're looking to have in the next 6 to 12 months, and then accessing government services through digital wallets. And so, different experiments like this of finding ways to connect, all of our citizens. As you remember, the Kingdom of Hawaii was not just for Kanaka. You were a Hawaiian citizen if you joined the government. And so efforts like this, I think, in conjunction with all other efforts going on, within the island chain and outside, are all going to push us forward to think outside the box, to connect with other digital nations around the world and continue this thought process of the future.
And I think something Ikaika said got me thinking, and I think he's absolutely right about the future. And again, I live in the 19th century, so you have to forgive me. But the future, it's vital to make those links to the things that are going on. But I also think that in a Kanaka Iwi sense, and in a Hawaiian Kingdom sense, the land, the physical place here is important also. And I talk about that because this physical place has been claimed by outside sources, right? If you drive your car, whether you're in Hilo or whether you're in Honolulu or Lahaina, if you pull over on the side of the road, I've done this to my friends before, pull over on the side of the road and look around you and tell me what you see that makes that place Hawaiian or the Kingdom of Hawaii. You don't see much, because there's a McKinley High School, there's a Jefferson High School, there's a Lincoln Elementary School, and so forth and so forth. They've claimed space on this physical landscape of Hawaii. There's a U.S. War Memorial at Pearl Harbor that's completely displaced 200 years of history of that area, right? So it's also important for people of Hawaii today to reclaim physical space and say, it's as easy as, using the traditional names, Leahi for Diamond Head and so forth. Those are small things that are physical and tangent that I think help the movement.
Yeah, and in that context, things like Senator English's push to have Lakuoko'a instated as a modern state of Hawaii date on the calendar makes a lot of sense, because then it takes up a part of our kind of mental imagination about the time that we live in.
Exactly. Well, and sorry to jump back in, but it's not only the physical landscape, it's the mental landscape, right? The generations of Hawaii for the last 100 years have been that their mental landscape has been claimed by a Department of Education that has taught them about this American territory and so forth. So it's reclaiming that mental landscape for our Haumana and our Keiki also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would encourage any Hawaiians out there to, look into the Papa Kilo database and search your family name for Kuleana land titles. This is a big effort that's occurring right now. All of the pu'uhonuas that are going on across our nation, whether that's in Hakipu'u, whether that's in Lahaina and Maui right now, they're all basically posting names of those Kuleana land title owners and looking for lineal descents to help them fight back and physically take that land back. Typically it was taken in a quiet title fashion and basically taken from us without us even knowing that we had ownership. I saw a call out for that personally. I was able to, connect with some of my cousins, look their name up, Naholava'a, and realize that, our family, Iwi Kapuna, were being disturbed and desecrated at Hakipu'u and Oahu. And so, this is something that I wasn't familiar with before. Now I'm becoming more and more familiar, but, taking back that Kuleana land ownership is extremely important. And I think is really step one in getting our land back physically.
Yeah, that's good. That makes me think, Keone, about what Chris was mentioning earlier in your prefatory remarks about the trajectory of the United States. And it makes me think about how all empires eventually collapse and erode, normally through internal pressures, right? If you look at the collapse of Rome or Soviet Union, right? These are all entities that change their shape and their power because of their own internal contradictions. The United States is no different. And I think, at least from my sense, is that our role as Hawaiians and as people who love Hawaii is to help it transition in a way that's actually really humane. Like the defense budget of the United States, I hope, will eventually become the education budget or the health budget of the United States. And that would hopefully free us up in Hawaii to think about places like Pu'uloa, or otherwise known as Pearl Harbor, like Ron was talking about, places which should be restored or cleaned up. We need to make sure that there's monies available to restore those lands, to heal those places, which are Superfund sites. And we should also be putting a push on the United States to talk about the opportunity costs of a century or more of military occupation. Think about the economic value that we haven't been able to take advantage of because of the use of those lands by the United States. And that applies also to Pohakuloa, to Makua Valley, which used to have a thriving community there, which was literally bombed by the United States. Fort Shafter, which is just right next door to where I live in Kalihi Valley, where there's a golf course and housing, which we as locals can't access and we can't take advantage of. We need to transition all those things back to our use.
And could I just share my screen and could you walk us briefly through, I guess, your part with the Aina Aloha Economic Futures, and really the assessment tool, and how has that been being implemented and adopted?
Sure, I'll try to do it in.
I need permission.
Well, Chris, I grant you permission.
Oh, can I have the host again?
So while Chris is getting that loaded up,
Aloha, Stacy.
I'll just talk about it. This year has been a little rough for everyone on Earth, and in the light of the massive problems with COVID, a group of Hawaiian leaders, I would call the other 13 people leaders, and I'm just a guy on the phone call. They started to convene conversations about what should the economic recovery and transition look like for Hawaii. We use the word aloha aina a lot. We flipped it, call it aina aloha, because it's a beloved land that we're trying to figure out the future for. And there's some really smart people in this group that came up with an assessment tool and a process for the community to sort of think amongst itself about things like the future of agriculture, the future of housing, tourism, adaptation for climate change. And so there was a series of meetings and ideas that came out of this. And so what we're looking at right now is how do we get the legislature, which convenes in about 2 months, to be very thoughtful about its own work in terms of directing state budgets and state policy. I'm personally really concerned about a push towards austerity, which which I can I imagine the state legislature is going to be arguing for. There's like a $1.5 billion to $2 billion hole in the Hawaii state budget, and everything that we've heard is that they're planning on cutting programs. They're cutting programs like domestic violence programs, social service programs, the education budget, things that are really critical to how we live. So I personally.
Could you take this line? Is this a good line, Ikaika, with the in terms of climate change, renewable energy?
Yeah, sure. Right. So we need to
like an example of someone who's used this assessment tool. Yeah.
Sure. And so, energy is a good example of a thing where a lot of times energy projects run into opposition from our own native communities. A good example is Kohuku. I think that was last year. It's hard to tell now what year we're in. Mm-hmm. But, these projects, another one is the geothermal projects on the Big Island. They're often done in such a way that the immediate surrounding community isn't the prime beneficiary of those projects. And so I think the question is, how do we make sure that the energy transition is actually good for the immediate community and for the native and working communities? I'm talking a lot, Chris. We should talk to somebody else.
Well, let me just pivot back to this chart that I had before. And, we could plug it into this little matrix where you have like the windmills, for example. It's like foreign direct investment, but it's off-brand, no public diplomacy. I don't think it's related to tourism, but it'll affect tourism when you see the protests and things happening on the news and the media, and that can't be good for tourism. So it's this idea that we have to have a coherent narrative that we put out there. Otherwise, the world sort of makes it up for us, and maybe we could pass it to Ron again. Because I think it goes back to knowing our history and what that is, history of Hawaii.
So yeah. So I'm sorry. What was the question?
So how are we fostering more coherence in the world as far as the identity of Hawaii? Okay. And how can we encourage the state to embrace this branding, nation branding within a state, which is complicated in itself?
Well, whether it's the Soviet Union, whether it's the change in Germany, whether it's changes all over the world, they happen because of enlightenment, right? They happen because the truth comes out, and like I said earlier, for 100 years. The truth about Hawaii was suppressed. And so you had, a native population that went to school and didn't know who they were. That's changing. I taught for 10 years at the Center for Hawaiian Studies at Kamakakuokalani. And when I started teaching, from that day to my last year, things, my students coming into class started to know who they were. When you tell, a Hawaiian kid in 5th grade or 6th grade or 7th grade that his nation was one of the most literate nations on earth, when you tell him that there are all kinds of things about his nation that he didn't know. I have a list of facts. You want me to go through that real quick?
That would be great. Yeah.
Okay. So it's based on the idea that what does the average person know about Hawaii? Sometimes we have a problem with speaking to the choir, but outside of our bubble, what do people know about Hawaii? And compare that to what Hawaii was. So here's a list of things. If you have a moment, just kind of listen with me. I can't undo 100 years of training in 2 minutes, but hopefully if we focus, you'll feel these words, right? So these are things that are absolute true facts about that kingdom of Hawaii, that Hawaiian kingdom that was started in 1843. Just prior to that, in 1840, you had a mo'i, a native monarch that voluntarily gave up 2/3 of his power to create a nation that would be recognized by the rest of the world. Now, why did he do that? He did that because European powers were taking places throughout the Pacific all the time. He was next. I mean, Hawaii was obviously, without question, going to be taken. But he voluntarily gives up a huge portion of his power to create a sovereign nation that's recognized and therefore is protected. That's huge. In 1843, France and England on November 28th recognize Hawaii as a co-equal sovereign. And they bring it into the family of nations. The first non-European born nation in the world to achieve that. Again, run by native Hawaiians, right? In 1852, the Constitution for the Kingdom of Hawaii, proclaimed by Kauikeoli, offered universal manhood suffrage. Any race could vote in Hawaii. Now that's a decade prior to the Civil War in America. A decade after any race could vote in Hawaii, Americans are killing each other over whether or not to own Black folks, right? And in Hawaii, a decade prior, those same people could own property, become citizens, and vote. That's a progressive nation. 1870s, by the 1860s, 1870s, Hawaii was the second most literate nation in the world, behind only Scotland, well ahead of the United States as far as literacy. King David Kalakaua, the Hawaiian monarch, was the first head of state to be given a state dinner at the White House in Washington, D.C., as Ulysses S. Grant. Kalakaua was the first monarch to circumnavigate the globe. And as I mentioned earlier, by the 1880s, Hawaiian Kingdom had 136 consulates around the world and were respected around the world. So those are things that when we tell our 5th graders, when we tell our 7th graders, when we tell our 9th graders, that's a different story than that legacy of falling behind, you know, being this, being that, and so forth. And that starts to foster people getting involved in the building of their nation. And so when we talk about the future, we don't have so many disaffected communities. We have people involved and understanding what their place is in their nation and their role in bringing it into the future.
And I think mahalo, Ron, and I think that kind of echoes the point that we are what we celebrate, and how great to embody that. I'll share just 2 pages here before Ikaika knocks off. The first one is La Hoi Ho'ea, Kaina and myself with Nauivi Keone. This was in Manhattan. And then the second photo is Kaina with La Kuokoa. I think you were solo that day. I don't know. I think I had work or something. But let me just share the screen. And maybe Kaina, you could share some mana'o, or just some memory. This was a good one, 2013. You have Kaina there.
I was here that no, Uncle Al is the one from Boston. So we were at Rockefeller Park. Well, we had a great celebration, a great turnout. I think there's a couple of people that came from Texas in this picture as well. So that was a nice, that the invite spread, you know, throughout the East Coast and people traveled.
And it was probably through the Nauivi social media accounts that we got the word out, and you had an email list going. We don't know how the people heard about us, but
you know, and sometimes a post here and there, you know, so yeah, and it actually was just the word of mouth of everyone finding the information and sharing it as well.
Yeah, I want to mahalo Kaina for this, because as myself being a diaspora Hawaiian, was really the first time being able to express my rights as a Hawaiian national, celebrate my holidays, be part of my first ceremonies, Hawaiian ceremonies, and to do that in New York was really mind-blowing to me after growing up, you know, not understanding all this history. So just want to directly mahalo you for the foundation that you built, that brought us to today and brought, you know, a weekly celebration of Mauna Kea every Friday from, you know, the day that they started on the Mauna in July of 2019 until COVID hit through the entire winter. And then that was through your leadership to continue that Pahu beating in New York City.
Mahalo, yes. Also support of everyone always showing up, yeah, when we have that kahea. And so it was very helpful to have the support of everyone. I just actually noticed that this was a La Ho'i Ho'i celebration, not a La Ku'u.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I wanted to show this to contrast because La Hoi Hoia, usually in the summer, and we get a nice turnout. La Kuokoa, it's like close to Thanksgiving. On the East Coast of New York, it gets much colder. And for some reason, I see this picture and I don't remember being there. Let me just, it's from, could you talk about this picture?
Oh, that was last year. I did it. I actually was by myself. The celebration continues, and I knew everyone. I think it was a 175th year that was honoring the holiday. It was a significant time, and so I can't remember what was happening, but the year before this year, we celebrated at Lua thanks to Keone, who hosted his space when he had in Manhattan, and we had a celebration there. And then this was the year after. I can't remember what happened, but all I know was I said, oh, well, we still have to celebrate. So I went to Union Square and I had my flag, I had the flyers, and I was handing out information about La Ku'oko'a and just celebrating in that way. That was what I was handing out, that leaflet there. Yeah, that's funny.
Wow. So even if you were the only one there, you're still celebrating.
Always kako, right? Yeah.
Until the last aloha aina. Well, okay. Ikaika had to excuse himself for another appointment, but I guess we can take any questions from our audience if they have any. They can just drop it in the chat, and we'd love to hear your feedback on what La Kuoko'a means to you, how you celebrate, how you would like to celebrate. What do you think? What are your thoughts? Okay. Any closing remarks, I guess, before we play this this last clip? How are we celebrating this year? If anyone would like to share. It's November 28th.
I think I'm doing a live something or other for Kamehameha Schools Maui to the students there.
So aloha, I think Chris is just frozen for a moment. This is Stacy. Kalamai. Chris, are you back on?
Yes. Am I here?
Okay, wonderful. Okay.
Mahalo. Keone, where will you be, La Kuoko'a?
I will be here in Georgia. I've been helping my wife out a bit. If people don't know the history of Georgia, it was the first country to leave the Soviet Union. My wife is from a disputed region that actually became occupied by Russia in 1993, called Pazia Sohumi. And so, we were here during a disputed election at the end of October and have been trying to help support the efforts, basically pushing back against what's looked at a tampered election. So I've been spending my time this year helping her with the causes in Georgia. That being said, for the holiday, I'm open and available, and we'll probably be doing a celebration on my own here.
Awesome.
If just
Kinda. Oh,
I was just gonna say, as an offer, if anybody needs, this isn't to the world, but if any of you folks need resources for your celebrations, hit me up. We've got quite a few pretty interesting things at the archives.
awesome. Kinda. Plans for La Kuokoa?
Just yet, but there is lots happening and being planned. I think it's a Vaiaulu. There's a site that also has a lot of educational resources, as well as upcoming live events that are being going to be live links that will be celebrating throughout the week, not just on that day. So I'm going to be kind of just plugging into these celebrations as they come about. Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have any definitive resources to stretch you to, but I think it is Avaya Ulu. I could be wrong, a Kalamai if so, where they have educational resources and also additional links for the celebration. So yeah, I'll be tuning in here on the Aina somewhere and celebrating with our Lahui.
Well, we have a lot of comments in the chat. Let me try and scroll up a bit. Okay, Troy, sadly, might have to celebrate La Kuokoa working. I've been really exercising my vacation days that I never take for these sort of occasions. So I really invite you to make your own holiday if one doesn't exist for you yet, and just if you are able to take the day off from work and cite a national holiday, taking the day off. So it's kind of what I did today. Any suggestions for how we should celebrate in PA? Well, I think we were talking about these virtual options, but even like a nice dinner, I think would be nice with all. We have dinner for other holidays. Why not La Kuokoa? Yeah? Just a suggestion. What other comments? Lehuanani would love, maybe Halavai can share that with everyone. I will investigate and follow up. And all these Mauli Ola virtual gatherings are archived on the website with links. So I will be sure to collect any related links that have been shared for the website. We are a volunteer-led nonprofit. Everybody kind of chips in their free time. So any donations are welcome as well if you enjoyed this event and would like us to continue putting on more and providing these resources for our community. Are there any other questions?
I think there's 2 questions in the Q&A section.
Okay. Oh, okay. Can Hawaiians sue the Department of Hawaiian Homelands for systemic racism since they are working with banks? It's from Troy.
So I don't know the direct answer to that. I know that there are open lawsuits right now against Department of Hawaiian Homelands, specifically due to Mauna Kea and basically arresting Native Hawaiians on Hawaiian homelands, which is where Pu'uhonua Pu'uhuluhulu was based. I know that our shared Oli Kumu, Auntie Puolani Kanaka Ole, is leading one of those charges. So I know there are efforts being done through the courts to push back against Hawaiian homelands encroaching upon Hawaiian rights currently.
Okay, Troy says awesome. Another question, what have we been able to find in terms of Hawaiian history of celebration of the holiday? You want to take this one, Ron?
Sure, yeah. So, the declaration was November 28th, 1843. The first national celebration, the first government celebration was in 47. So it was 4 years later. Kauikeoli asked in the Privy Council for his Minister of Foreign Affairs to come up with a plan on how to celebrate. And they did. They came up with a plan to fire the cannons from Punch Bowl and to bring out the flags and so forth. So the first national celebration was 1847. It was never passed as a legislative act. It was a royal proclamation. So there were some years when it was celebrated and some when it wasn't, just because. But it grew more and more important to the nation and to the people as pressures against the nation rose, right? So in the 1870s and 1880s, you start to see some really strong celebrations of La Kuakoa, including the 40th anniversary, which was in 83. That's where you see that little ticket that people use all the time. I think I have one here in front of me. I can, yeah.
Oh, is that right?
So this is a duplicate. This isn't the real thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but the real ticket is in the Hawaii State Archives. So a group called Hui o Pio Pio, young Hawaiians, did this 40th anniversary. They had a grand luau at Pohukaina. Pohukaina is the former royal burial mound where the Ali'i were buried that went up to Mauna Ala. Now there's still about a dozen and a half, 2 dozen Ali'i buried there, and it's on the grounds of the Ilani Palace today. But it's called Pohukaina. And so this was your actual ticket to get into that luau at Pohukaina. We have one of them, the original one in the state archives. So we've made these kind of duplicates as celebrations. But so that 40th anniversary was pretty huge. There were some grand celebrations under Kalakaua and even the Queen. One thing to remember is post-overthrow, while it continued to be celebrated by the other governments, Hawaiians used that day as a day to declare their steadfastness for the Queen. And what I mean by that is, on La Kuakoa every year, you had significant amounts of resignations from government jobs by Native Hawaiians saying, we're not going to serve this new government, including in 94. So on November 28th, 1894, you had the majority, if not all, of the Native Hawaiian fire engine company resign their positions, saying we're not going to work for the provisional government anymore. And I used to always tell my students, we have to understand that sacrifice. That's not quitting Walmart and going to work at Safeway. I mean, that was a government job. That was how they fed their families. That was how they survived. And they gave that up rather than serving the new government. So those Hawaiians used La Kuakoa 1893 into the 1900s as a way of protest, as a way to stand up.
And I do want to add something to that, something we didn't get to cover in our conversation, but sharing some mana'o from Uncle Leon Su in Free Hawaii. He was sharing some mana'o with us a few weeks ago, just having another conversation about the statehood vote in 1959 and why, that is disputed. So quickly, when the UN was created in 1945, about a third of the world's population, 750 million people, were living in territories that were dependent on colonial powers. Since then, about 80 former colonies have gone through the decolonization process, asserted the rights for self-determination and gained independence, and gone on to become UN nation states. So that actually makes up 2/3 of the General Assembly today. In 1946, Hawaii was placed on that list to be decolonized, and fast forward to 1958, the UN was in the process of forming an official decolonization committee to expedite the decolonization efforts. The US, within 12 months, moved Hawaii through the statehood vote process so that we would not be transferred onto that committee. And so, UN Resolution 742 basically requires that for these plebiscites, they need to offer freedom of choice between several possibilities, including independence. The wording on the statehood ballot vote for Hawaii was, shall Hawaii immediately be admitted into the Union as a state? And the only possible answers were yes or no. So basically the yes vote meant you were voting for the territory of Hawaii to become a US state, and no meant that you were voting for the territory to remain a US territory of Hawaii. So there's no option for independence. So this doesn't comply with Charter Resolution 742 of the UN. Second, and alluding to what Ron was just mentioning, was that the UN Charter expects that only citizens of the occupied nation will be able to make decisions regarding their self-governance. As in, Hawaiian nationals are supposed to be the only ones that vote in this vote. It doesn't mean that you have to be Kanaka Mauli. It meant that you were supposed to be a citizen of the nation of Hawaii. But the way that this vote was run was only US citizens living in the territory of Hawaii were allowed to vote. And so if you were a patriot and you decided to not become a US citizen within this territory, and you asserted your rights as a Hawaiian national, you were excluded from this vote. So basically you had a vote in 1959 of foreign nationals living in the occupied nation of the Hawaiian Kingdom that voted for statehood of Hawaii. So as a result, this is what Uncle Leon is pushing right now in the UN, that the UN Resolution 1469, which basically is the pillar that the United States government sits on and points to validate that Hawaii is part of the continental US because of that vote. Basically, the argument is that the election was held incorrectly, and people want to examine that. So just kind of touching on what Ron was talking about, if you were a subject of the Hawaiian Kingdom and you decided to not be a citizen of this US territory, you were excluded from this vote that was supposed to be our moment to exert our independence. But you wanted to share a bit of that mana'o from Uncle Leon.
Mahalo nui. I should say that Keone was also on the board of Hawai for a moment, and we should say that these are not the views that Hawai shares. We're just sharing this information, and it's a way to raise awareness for a deeper understanding of the dynamics that are happening back home in Hawaii for our ohana here on the East Coast and back home. So I'll just play this video for us, and then I'll see you on the other side, and we'll say a final aloha. So let me share my screen. It's just a little 60-second thing we did in a time of COVID. So mahalo nui, kaina ran, ikaika.
Aloha Aina. November 28th is Independence Day for Hawaii.
This day, in 1843, Great Britain and France welcomed Hawaii into the family of nations.
US troops would later back a coup d'etat, leading to the unlawful seizure of these islands.
Hawaiian patriot James Kauli'a once said, "Agreeing to annexation is like agreeing to be buried alive."
Indeed, the illegal 1898 annexation
and the illegal 1959 plebiscite
continues to be protested globally by thousands of Hawaiians
and allies today.
In our post-American world and the dramatic reality of coronavirus, we ask the question,
what does a...
Okay. Mahalo nui to our panelists and all of you out there for joining us. We hope that you can make your La Ku'oko'a a special one, however way you choose to celebrate. And please share this information. Like, follow, subscribe, halavai, social media. And have a great evening, day, all around.
Yeah.
Puni kahunua.
Aloha.
Aloha aina. Mahalo.
Aina.
Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Ahui ho.
Ahui ho.
Ahui ho.